Hello, race fans! My name is Taylor, and welcome to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. Last podcast number 12, was all about series updates around last week's race. Closing out my thoughts there was also a discussion about the playoff picture that's forming, track updates involving testing at Circus of the Americas, and a Bristol Dirt Race procedures update, and closing off with a talk about some NASCAR drama. So if you haven't checked out any of that podcast, please make sure you do. It's podcast number 12 right before this one. But now let's move from updates back into statistics and numbers here with a pre-race podcast for the Pennzoil 400 presented by Jiffy Lube at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. This race will take place on Fox this Sunday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let's begin with the glitz and glam of the weekend by looking at some notable paint schemes for the Pennzoil 400. So we're going to start going through the list. We're going to go in order for the most part. So we're going to start with the number 5 of Kyle Larson with the HendrickCars.com paint scheme with the American red, white, and blue kind of look. And he's also not the only Hendrick car this weekend that's going with an all-American looking paint scheme. And I know it's not because it's like America, but take a look at the 24 car from William Byron, the Liberty University paint scheme, both with the red, white, and blue kind of paint schemes. I remember when the Liberty University car was announced or shown first during the offseason, I believe it was, there were some issues with the layout of the paint scheme itself. Like the red on the bottom of the apron didn't match up with the blue. It was almost like it was a stepping stool, and I just remember it was real wonky. So it looks like they fixed that, which is really good to see. So those are the Hendrick cars that I wanted to talk about this weekend. Now I'm going to move from the Hendrick cars on to the next car in the lineup, the number 7 of Corey LaJoie for the Built Bars. LaJoie, to me, has the most out there, and I say that in the best way possible, and unique looking cars, and I love to watch them on the track. He has had a Scooby-Doo paint scheme when he drove in the 32 car, as well as a paint scheme with literally his face on the hood of the car. So it's really exciting for me to see that the unique paint schemes are carrying over to his new team, a new team owner, to kind of carry on that tradition for Corey LaJoie, who, like I said, always has one of the most fun cars on the track, so very neat for me to see. I also want to look at Kyle Busch's paint scheme, which is very unique as well this weekend because it isn't one that we've ever really seen on his car. They're not colors that we usually see in the sport, and they're not colors we've seen for Kyle Busch. So this weekend we'll see Kyle Busch sports some vintage looks for FLM Chocolates. It's a paint scheme for the 40th anniversary. This is a company based in Las Vegas, which is Kyle Busch's hometown, same with his brother Kurt Busch. So really cool to see Kyle Busch repping a hometown company there. So it'll be exciting to see this car on the track with colors we usually don't see, this really interesting color of blue with the brown. To finish this off, I'm going to quickly glaze over some more paint schemes I'm going to put up on your screen here that I'm not 100% on. I know the Kyle Busch paint scheme I'm still not 100% sure on. I think it's just because it's so different. But here are some other ones I want to quickly mention. The 23 of Bubba Wallace with a brand new Columbia paint scheme, something we haven't seen on his car yet. I mean, we've only had 3 races in this season so far, but interesting paint scheme from him. We also have to talk about the 37 of Ryan Preece with a very springy look to his car this weekend from Natural Light. It's an interesting one as well. The colors, I don't know. I'm not very fond of this car, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's different. It's very different. Finally, want to look at the Richard Petty Motorsports car, the 43 from Eric Jones this weekend with Medallion Bank paint scheme. They have a theme of very busy looking cars. This does not derail from that at all. It is a very busy car with the classic Petty Scoop. You got to put that in every week. I mention that every time I talk about the paint schemes for the 43 car, but very, very, very cluttered car yet again. So these are the paint schemes I wanted to look at, and for me, paint schemes talks are always so much fun. I love when people on social media will post paint schemes, their ideas, and I know there's a lot of people on social media as well that make their own designs for the cars that are super fun for me to look at. So like I said, always fun, lots of new schemes for this weekend, and I'm sure the next few weeks with the Bristol Dirt Race coming up especially, there will be a lot more to look at. But with the glitz and glam out of the way, we have to move on to talking about the numbers with the track history and the race layout. So let's talk about the race and the track. Las Vegas Motor Speedway is a 1.5 mile track. The race will be 400.5 miles long and span 267 laps just like the last race. The stage breaks will also be similar to the last race, as stage 1 ends at lap 80, stage 2 ends at lap 160, and stage 3 lasts 107 laps to the checkered flag. And also, just like last week, there will be a competition caution on lap 25 to give the teams time to make adjustments to their cars due to there being no practice or qualifying time as a result of the COVID-19 guidelines, making sure teams are staying distant and safe, minimizing the time on the track. Now that we've broken down some of the race and track layout, let's move on to lining up some of the odds for this race, talking about past statistics with drivers and ones with our current lineup of drivers. So we're going to start by talking about the first race won here in 1998, where Mark Martin took the checkered flag. The driver with the most wins at this track is Jimmie Johnson with 4 wins, and the team with the most wins here is Roush Fenway Racing with 7 wins. And no surprise when I hear that Roush Fenway has won the most races here. The manufacturer with the most wins at this track is Ford with 12 wins. When it comes to active drivers, the last driver to win at this track was Joey Logano in 2020. The active driver with the best average finish at this track in the past 10 races is Brad Keselowski with an average finish of 4.6. And the active driver, finally to finish us off with the most wins at this track, is a 3-way tie between Ford drivers Joey Logano, Kevin Harvick, and Brad Keselowski with 2 wins each. So, important facts to note here: since 2016, there has only been one manufacturer to win at Las Vegas Motor Speedway that was not Ford, and it was Toyota in 2017 with Martin Truex Jr. winning that race. So, the Ford camp has truly dominated at this track for the past so many years, and this could have included 2014, but I have to keep in mind that Stewart-Haas Racing used to be Chevrolet when Harvick got his first win at the track in 2015. Speaking of Harvick, let's start lining up the field. After we've lined up the odds, let's line up the field and see who's going to be starting on the pole. Like I said, speaking of Harvick, he is your number 1 guy on the pole, first place. We finally get to see him lead the field to green next to last weekend's race winner, William Byron. A dangerous situation for the drivers here, as one of the best at the track will start in first. Behind them, making up the top 5 is Larson, Truex, and McDowell, who's hanging in there. He's doing a very good job this season, a dream season for that team. And then we look at the rest of the field, we have to note a few things here. All of the Hendrick team makes up the top 10, with Byron in second, Larson in third, Elliott in 8th, and Bowman in 9th. A very pleasant surprise for me to see, and it's something I hope we see more of as the season goes on, bringing that Hendrick camp back to life in the next few years. I think they're going to be a really dominant team as they start to kind of find their way. The young drivers gain more experience. I'm hoping that's the case. Also, 2 other dominant drivers at this track making up the Team Penske camp are starting 10th and 15th, the 2 car of Keselowski and the 22 car of Logano, after a very disappointing race last week where they both just plummeted to the back of the field during the second half of the race. And not to leave out their teammate Ryan Blaney, who had one heck of a horrible start to the season so far, is starting all the way back in 26th, also hoping that he starts to gain some momentum during the season and starts to put together some better races. Finally, I want to draw attention to our Las Vegas natives, Kurt and Kyle Busch, with Kurt Busch starting in 7th after an impressive run these past few weeks, and Kyle Busch starting in 14th. So we know our lineup, we know our odds, so let's talk about potential winners for this weekend. After looking at the numbers, it is clear, vividly clear, that our top contenders this weekend are going to be Logano, Keselowski, and Harvick as your top dogs statistically at this track. We also know that we have a strong showing from the Ford camp, as all these drivers that I just mentioned are from Ford as of right now. And we also have a strong showing from the Toyotas at the track. There's the Chevrolets, really, they could be in the mix this weekend, but I'm highly doubtful. I don't want to say impossible, but doubtful that they're going to make a big appearance winning this race. However, weirder things have happened, and I have to say, after these past 3 weeks, I feel like picking a winner is comical at this point. I don't mean that as a totally bad thing, but the fields have been completely flipped from what we've seen in the past, and everyone we think will run well just does not, or either isn't at the front of the field when it's all said and done. So I'm not going to go solely off of numbers this week, but from what I have seen in the past 3 weeks of racing. Last week, Joey and Brad had a really rough race, and I have a hard time picking them to win this race just solely based off of they didn't have the momentum to carry them through to win last week. However, we do have another driver that I've talked about that is silent but deadly this year. With 3 top 10 finishes in a row, there are 2 drivers it's going to tail. It could be McDowell or Harvick. And based on Kevin Harvick's success at this track, his track record, with his past and his top 10 finishes for the past 3 races, I think the obvious choice, if we're going with obvious, for this weekend's win is Kevin Harvick. So I got to go with Kevin Harvick to win this weekend's race, in my opinion. If we're talking underdogs, however, I cannot count out 2 specific drivers. One, Kurt Busch, who has done incredibly well so far this season. I mentioned previous podcasts, you can throw anything at him and he will overcome adversity, and he's finished pretty darn well so far in the season, finishing in the 8th position last weekend. And I want to mention Kyle Larson, who finished 4th last week, who seems to be running really well and quietly through the field, making a lot of quiet noise and doing very well this season so far, so I can't count those two drivers out as well if we're talking underdogs. I also have to keep in mind, like I said, the fields have been flipped and so have expectations, so I picked these drivers as potential winners, but I can almost guarantee you that at this point we will have another surprise winner from a driver who we would least expect. What is funny is that if we look at the playoff picture right now, the drivers we would expect to be at the top of the points chart are, minus Michael McDowell, but the people that are at the top are not finishing races in the top 3 or 5 most weekends that we've seen so far, and it's only been 3 weekends, like we would expect. So everything is very topsy-turvy at the moment with little to no consistency to go off of. Everything is wacky right now, but let me know in the comments below who you think is going to win the Pennzoil 400 presented by Jiffy Lube, and let me know your craziest race predictions too. I would love to hear them. However, my prediction to win this weekend, like I said, is Kevin Harvick with an underdog win from potentially Kurt Busch or Kyle Larson, but make sure you tune in this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern Standard Time on Fox to watch the Pennzoil 400 to make sure your prediction to win the race was right. And with that, I gotta thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of Above the Yellow Line, the podcast where we talk about all the updates, theories, news, recaps, and more of the NASCAR Cup Series. Next podcast, I'll break down the race for y'all and talk about everything that went down. So thank you all yet again, and until next time, I'll see ya.